through what you know about evolution. We talk about evolution. We're going to be doing for about the next 2 months. We're going to be talking about biological evolution. And this is not a single chapter out of your book. This is material that's pulled from about 3 chapters in your book plus some other resources based on the state standards. So it's not cut and dry, but a lot of what we're going to be doing is coming from chapters 13 through 15. So you all said things like, organisms changing over time, and when an organism grows, and when an organism gets a gene from another organism, and stuff like that, and survival of the fittest. Well, the simplest possible definition for biological evolution is it's biological change over generations. It never happens in one lifetime. It is not something that you or I can do. I cannot evolve. You cannot evolve. We use that colloquially. We'll say, well, my perspective has evolved on that. But we didn't biologically evolve. And the big central idea in all of biology is that all of the living things on this planet, and do you realize how diverse the living things on this planet are? Look at you. Look at you glorious multicellular organisms. And then we got lavender plants, like the beautiful lavender plant behind Chloe. Makes nice smelling oils. I don't make any nice smelling oils. You don't make any nice smelling oils.
You make BO.
We make BO. Well, actually, the bacteria on our bodies make BO. We've got this little pepper plant here that produces a chemical called capsaicin. Make your eyes water and sting. Do I dare to eat a second one today? Yeah, I do. No, we're out. That's the last one. Holy cow, I'm going to regret this any second. So, I can't make capsaicin. I can't make chemicals that'll make my eyes water and my mouth burn. I'm going to regret this. It's a Thai chili. Kind of hot.
I don't like spicy.
I do.
I like buffalo.
But I still regret this.
Like buffalo wings. I like buffalo.
So, we can't do any of that. There are organisms that are capable of auto-evisceration. Do you know what auto-evisceration is?
No, but I feel like Sarah Boat can.
It's not. It's not. This is just like an extra little bonus fact because I am a personal fan of disgusting facts from the world of biology. So auto means self. To eviscerate means to rip out something's guts. Auto-evisceration, the sea cucumber, when it's threatened, dilates its anus and shoots 90% of its guts out its butt, and then it slinks away because they don't move real fast.
Sounds like a party.
Not so much because they have to regrow all those guts that they just shot out their butt. But the predator that was chasing them, that was going to eat them, is usually content with the pile of guts, and so the sea cucumber lives to fight another day. Well, not fight really, but to auto-eviscerate another day. You and I can't do that. This is weird. The world of biology is about as weird as you can imagine, multiplied by 100. And the central idea behind biological evolution is that all of this amazing, weird stuff on this planet has a single common ancestor. So you and that pepper plant over there, you're cousins. Distant, distant, distant cousins. You and that lovely blue whale, cousins. That we're cousins with all living things, that all living things are related through a common ancestor. Let's talk about what common ancestor means. Does that sound crazy to you? Yes, doesn't it? Who here has a sibling?
Sadly.
Okay. Who is your common ancestor with your sibling?
Parents.
Your parents. Those are your common ancestors. Who here has a cousin? Who's your common ancestor with your cousin? First cousin, your grandparents. You share grandparents. Anybody know their second cousins? I do too. Who's your common ancestor with your second cousins? Your great-grandparents. You share great-grandparents. I have a big enough family. My end of it's pretty small, but I've actually sat at family reunions with my 4th and 5th cousins. We share great-great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents. our common ancestors get further back in the past. So who are you more closely related to, your sibling or your cousin? Sibling, because your common ancestor is more recent. Does this seem insane to anybody else? Yeah, how do a blue whale and a sequoia have a common ancestor? Seriously? Moser, this is ludicrous. I think that you're just full of it. Okay, I accept that critique. Does this seem less crazy to you? That this kind of single-celled organism might give rise to some single-celled organisms that look a little bit different from it? That doesn't seem too crazy. Or that this kind of single-celled or that maybe this single-celled organism could give rise to single-celled organisms that look a little bit different than it. Actually, this one's a colonial organism. It's a bunch of single cells that have joined forces to survive better. It's not a multicellular organism. They're all capable of living on their own, but they're hanging out for safety and efficiency. That seems less crazy, right? I think so. Or that this, we said colonial organism, Volvox, could give rise to some things that are pretty simple but pretty plant-like. That doesn't seem completely insane to most people. Or that this really simple plant-like thing, this is called a liverwort, by the way, and we have them if you go down to any of the locks in the park, and you go down into the locks, you'll find those liverworts growing on the stones. They're so cool. They feel leathery and lizardy. And that they could give rise to these simple plants, and that maybe these simple plants like this moss could give rise to slightly more complicated plants. That doesn't seem insane, does it? That simple plants could maybe someday have offspring that are more complicated plants, and that maybe more complicated plants could give rise to even more complicated plants. Does that seem unreasonable? That seems reasonable. That doesn't seem too crazy. But this seems crazy. But the thing is, we're not talking about a bacteria-like organism having a whale for a baby. We're talking about a series of tiny little steps that end up with this enormous family tree. This is the family tree of all the living things on Earth. You are here. You and blue whales and earthworms and ladybugs and bees and dragonflies, leeches, fleas, stink bugs. We had a stink bug in here this morning. Honeybees. We're all in there. All of my friendly little plants here in the room are contained in there. It's not a real detailed family tree. I mean, we might be used to seeing family trees that look like, well, like this. And you have pictures. Maybe you have one on the wall at home and you've got pictures of great-grandma and great-grandpa and their kids, and then, your Aunt Henrietta and, that guy she married, and they had a bunch of kids, and that, I don't know why the dog's in there. Clearly the dog is not biologically related to those people. But this is the kind of family tree we're used to, where we have our ancestors and we have all of our descendants, and then all of their descendants and their descendants. But this thing here is also a family tree. It just happens to be a family tree of all life on Earth, and you'll notice that it's got a single root. That's that single common ancestor. Now, single common ancestor isn't a modern bacteria, which is actually what that's a picture of. But to the untrained eye, it would look a lot like bacteria. It would look a lot like bacteria to you or I. And, this gets us a single ancestor, 3 big groups of living things. These 2 being prokaryotes. Remember, we've been talking about those. And all of this stuff, hey, look at that, eukarya. Being eukaryotes. You obviously don't have to draw this. That would be ridiculous. But That seems, how does it seem to you? How does that sit with you? Talk at your table. If you have nobody at your table, you can talk to yourself, or you can go over. That nice young man over there would be happy to talk to you, I'm sure. How long is a generation? What is a generation? Does that matter? Does that matter? Okay, so who is saying 5 years? 10, 20, 30, 100. We got like 20s and 30s, maybe 100. We got...
Every time there's a new offspring in the family,
It depends. It depends. So, for humans, a generation, for lack of anything better, I'm just going to give her cute little curly hair. So, every time that there is offspring, we're talking about a generation. This is called a pedigree. It's a chart that we use to track family relationships, and we'll use them a lot when we get into genetics. That's a pedigree right there. And each one of these lines represents a generation. So here's our first generation, second generation, third generation. Huh. Tell me why the tea kettle's whistling?
because there's combustion. Not combustion, that's not the word.
No, that's not the word, but you're close. It's the opposite. So, okay, let me ask you this. Is this a fair and reasonable explanation of the tea kettle? Heat is being applied to the kettle's heating up, the water in it is heating up, the molecules are moving faster, they're spreading apart, they're traveling out the spout, and they're vibrating this little piece of metal here, which makes it whistle. Is that a true and reasonable explanation for why the tea kettle's whistling? Boy, that's hot.
So if you blow on that little metal
I can't blow it hard enough to get it to vibrate. I've tried it. So, could it also be a true explanation that Mrs. Gabbard, who's subbing in next door, walked over here earlier, turned the burner on, and walked out? Could that be true, possibly? Can we prove it? No. When we talk about evolution, the reason I talk about the tea kettle, both of those are true and reasonable explanations, but they're in different realms. One is in the realm of science, solidly. We're talking about the molecules in the water moving faster, moving across that membrane, making it vibrate. That is all natural phenomena. We can study it, we can isolate it, we can measure it. We have no clue who turned the tea kettle on. This is a metaphor. We're now no longer talking about a tea kettle. We're now talking about the concept of biological evolution, because there are some individuals who have a really hard time separating what we can know with science, like the biological mechanics of evolution, versus how the whole thing starts. We don't know who turned the tea kettle on, and that's a question that's outside the realm of science. So that's a whole different set of questions. You can have, and different cultures and different people throughout history have had different ideas about, this is metaphor again, who turned the metaphoric tea kettle on. You got turtles, you got corn woman, you got Genesis, you got all kinds of stuff. We don't know who turned the tea kettle on. There's one Sumerian creation myth where I think one of the gods gets hacked into hundreds of pieces, and each of those pieces becomes a species, and like it gets pretty weird. So different people have had different ideas about who turned the tea kettle on. That's not what we can do here, because this is just science. Just science, one way to understand the world. It's a pretty powerful way to understand the world, but it's just one way to understand the world. So for some people, that kind of makes it okay to understand the biological mechanics of how it works, because that's what we're going to talk about here. So each of these things is a generation, and we could add additional generations. We could marry off this guy, and We could give him a couple of kids, him and his wife. We could marry her off. They could have some kids. Maybe they have 2 boys. We could marry him off. We could have 3, well, 2 girls and a boy. There we go. So that's generations. A human generation, roughly, usually figured at about 20 years. Now, does that mean that everybody has a baby at 20? No. And humans are biologically capable of reproducing earlier than 20. On average, probably like 13 or 14, though that's a pretty rough road, especially for females. Well, even in a primitive culture, like the body is capable but not really ready. Very young births tend to have high complication rates. But 500 years ago, by 15 or 16, most people were parents. That's your age, folks. They were like functional adults. Does that freak you out a little bit? Holy cow. But that was functional adulthood at that time in history. It's not now. And there are people who have babies at 15. There are people who have babies at 18. There are people who have babies at 20. There are people who have babies at 35. On average, we figure a human generation as being 20 to 25 years. So in 1 century, how many human generations can we get in? Fingers.
Wait, say it again.
In a century, how many human generations can we get in? A century is 100 years. Yeah, 4 or 5. 4.5. About 20 to 25 years. Yeah. If we're counting 20-year generations, we can get about 5 generations per century. If we're counting 25-year generations, it's about 4. If people are having babies at 40, we get like 2.5 in. Well, has anybody here ever had puppies around the house? Anybody ever had a dog who had puppies? Anybody actually intentionally bred dogs? Every now and then I get people who have, oh yeah, we used to breed our lab. So, on average, how old is a dog when they come into their first heat? Female dog. I had a lot of people in the last class say 1, and I seem to remember when I've had dogs who I got as puppies, it was like just over a year usually, and they would have their first heat. A lot of people who are intentionally breeding will not breed in that first heat because just like 13-year-olds having babies is rough on 13-year-olds, 1-year-old dogs having puppies is rough on the dog. Most people want to wait a cycle if they're going to breed. So if dogs on average, at 1 are capable of reproduction and in the wild, unrestrained, nobody fencing them up, nobody fixing them, nobody hiding them in a house and putting a diaper on them, they can have a baby. Well, actually, they can have a bunch of babies. They can have a litter. How many dog generations could we get in a century? About 100. If we assume that they're having a litter per year, now could they have more litters than that per year? They could. In some cases they do. Again, that's rough on the dog. And if we look at wolves, they typically have, guess how many litters a year?
1.
About 1 in the wild. What about cats? Anybody here had barn cats? Anybody had a barn cat population problem ever in their life? Oh, dear God. How old are cats when they come into their first heat? 5 to 6 months. Oh, yeah. Period of gestation period is, what, like a month? And they're ready to breed again 4 weeks after the kittens are born, 4 or 5 weeks after the kittens are born. They can. They very often don't, but they can. How many cat generations could you get in a century? If they can have 2 litters a year, 200 generations in a century? That's a lot of cats. Rabbits. Have you heard the expression breeding like bunnies? Never heard the expression breeding like bunnies? Okay, I raised rabbits in 4-H. So, rabbits can breed at about 8 weeks of age. They become fertile. 3-week gestation. They're pregnant for 3 weeks. And they can usually get pregnant again 4 weeks after their litter is born, if they've got ample food. It's a lot of bunnies. How many rabbit generations can you get in? A lot! Like 300 or 400 in a century. That's a lot of generations.
Oh, poor bunny.
Oh my God, the poor bunnies. The poor bunnies! Because mama has her babies, and then of that litter, if half of them are female, then they all have babies. I mean, it gets pretty crazy. We'll talk about that growth model when we talk about ecology. So the question that I had for you in the what do you know is, how long does evolution take? It depends, because it's changed over many generations. So in a species that's getting in 4 generations a century versus a species that's getting in 300 generations a century, the rate of evolution is going to be really, really different. So do you guys remember this? If I draw this, do you immediately have flashbacks? 0, 1, 10, 100, 1,000, and of course it was two-sided. What is this I'm drawing here?
Chart.
That megaplate. So they put bacteria there that with no antibiotic, and they grew, and then they had, I guess they had one time the amount, and then 10 times the amount, and then 100 and 1,000. Do you remember how long it took for bacteria to make it out to this 1,000 times the amount of antibiotic that would kill them?
Like 5 minutes.
No, it wasn't 5 minutes.
14 days.
11 days. You guys are pretty good, though. That's pretty close.
Maybe it was like 5 minutes.
So, how long do you think a generation is in bacteria?
About 13 days.
Minutes?
Yeah.
Hours? They reproduce pretty fast. Now, there are species of bacteria that take a day to reproduce. There are a lot of them that can reproduce in 30 minutes. They can have a generation every 30 minutes at the right temperature. So 13 days was enough time for that species of bacteria to evolve an entirely new species that was resistant to 1,000 times the antibiotic that previously would have killed them at a concentration of 1. 13 days, that's nothing, folks. That's not even close to a human generation. 13-day-old baby is, well, pretty boring, actually. Certainly not capable of reproduction, certainly not capable of going out and functioning as an independent organism. Even a 13-day-old rabbit probably isn't reproductively capable. But in 13 days, you can evolve an entirely new species of bacteria. It depends on the species. Ask the question, how long does it take to get from this one ancestor to all this amazing diversity of life that we see? Well, the scale of time is long. How old is the Earth? Do you know? Any ideas? We're going to watch a quick video